Greetings, virtual guests to Paleofest 2021, and welcome to this video about Paleoart, what it is, where it's used, and how you can make a contribution to science by making art. Hi, I'm Stephen Summers, and today I'll be taking you inside my little world of Paleoart to share some ideas, approaches, and sharing a bit about why Paleoart is so important to our understanding of extinct species and the way our world has evolved to become what it is today. First off, a little about my background. I'm an artist and illustrator from Milwaukee who has been working professionally since the 90s, doing everything from album covers, signs, mascot costumes, horror illustrations, Xbox games, sci-fi and fantasy games, portraits, game boards, skateboard shirts, books, and of course, Paleoart. While I've been doing art since I was a kid, I didn't really get into Paleoart until around 2013 when I was trying to draw a T-Rex from memory. And it looked terrible. I realized I was vastly ignorant about this subject, so I got a book. This one, right here. I read it cover to cover, and I was hooked. I moved on to this book. And also read that one. And of course, you have to get some dinosaurs to draw, so I got these. But there's only so much you can get from books and videos and models. Eventually you got to go out and draw a real dinosaur. So that's what I did. I started with the fossils at the local public museum. So let's take a minute now and talk about drawing dinosaurs in the wild of a museum. All right, now with COVID restrictions still keeping most of us home, we're going to do a virtual visit to the Burpee here. And as you can see, I'm starting to sketch out Homer virtually from a photo. I like to start out with a light pencil sketch on the paleo work because it needs to be fairly specific, and I'm trying to learn about the skeletal anatomy of these creatures as I'm drawing. You can see right now I'm getting some first ideas down about, where the horns are, how the frill lines up. So now I'm going in with the ink. The brush I use is, it's like an ink brush, except it's got an ink reservoir in it, so it continually feeds the ink, which is very nice, so you don't have to... Usually with traditional ink, you have to go back and keep dipping your brush and kind of rolling it out to get a nice point. So these brushes are really nice for not having to do that. You can get some really delicate, fine, beautiful lines with these, depending on how much pressure you use. And that tends to be the thing you end up practicing, is just how much pressure to apply to get a thick line, and really trying to find the lightest grip possible to get the thinnest, tiniest line you can make for some of these areas. Working out some of those rib cages now. The thing, there's really three questions you want to ask yourself before you ever draw a line, especially with ink. And those questions are, where does this line start? Where does this line end? And what is happening in between? So like on these long rib lines, I know there's a certain amount of space, and I know there's a certain amount of ribs. Say I know one starts, sort of midway on that shoulder blade, and then goes down to just before his elbow there. I'll cite that before I ever make a mark, just so I know. Getting into some of the vertebrae now. And his hip, of course. It's a pretty confusing angle to get the idea of the way those hip bones work out and how they sort of sweep down in a curve. Working on that big leg bone now. Leg bone's connected to the knee bone. I don't know if dinosaurs have knee bones. Patellas? Anybody out there? No? Patellas? Dinosaurs? I don't know. I know there's that one floating ribcage thing they get. The gastralia? Is that what those are called? Gastralia? Anyway, this guy doesn't have it. Or maybe they do. But I know he's got them foot bones. And this was at a weird angle, so I couldn't really see the tail. It kind of falls off there behind the leg. So we just don't show that. You know, part of this is to get across what it feels like to be sitting there, you know, just looking at this thing and the scale of it relative to yourself, because it gives you a different sense of, you know, what these creatures were like. And you know, it's hard to say specifically how that affects your drawing, but I think it does. I think there's a certain, you know, power and presence that one of these can have if you're actually there, looking at it, drawing it, feeling it. Of course, I'm contradicting it because I'm sitting here drawing from a photo, but I have been to the Burpee several times and drawn Homer on more than one occasion. He is one of my favorite mounts, and I love that he came from the researchers at the Burpee. A lot of times you go to a museum and see they're mounted skeletons, and they're actually copies of other skeletons. The first time I drew Jane was in Pittsburgh when I was out there, and only later did I realize that Jane was a copy of the Jane that we have here at Burpee. I've been using ink a long time, since I was a kid. I would draw like heavy metal images for t-shirts and Xerox posters and flyers. Because the ink really reproduced well, I developed sort of an approach that's mostly parallel lines. I'm kind of a purist when it comes to cross-hatching. I don't believe in it. I don't think cross-hatching produces an image I like. So there you go. A lot of people like it and have great success. I am not one of them. Now I'm working out the beak, which has got to be one of the weirdest things about the Triceratops. It's this massive creature with a beak. Okay, so this one looks done to me. Overall pretty happy. There's a few things that I probably would have done different had I been there in person to look at it and move around rather than just, you know, picking a photo. And I think you can kind of tell that by looking at my former version of Homer. This one I did while actually standing there at the Burpee. And Zorf will attest to that. But you can see I was able to move around a little bit and get in like some of the tail, a little bit more detail on the legs, a little bit of information about the hips that this one doesn't have. But you can see it's different than doing like a blueprint version of the skeleton. This is, you know, still an artist's impression of the skeleton and not necessarily something you would use to build your museum display. Of course, ink is only one way you can create paleo art. There's many mediums you can use. Other ways I like to work include digital painting, 3D modeling and then animating that, and also hand sculpting from various materials. Here's an example of a digital painting using one of my fossil studies of an Acrocanthosaurus. This guy was from the Dinosaur Discovery Museum in Kenosha. The first time I saw it, I was just amazed at how huge it is and that weird, unique spine that it has that was different from other theropods. That is what gives us its name, the high-spined lizard, or Acrocanthosaurus. Acro meaning high, cantho meaning spine, and saurus, lizard. After I scan the drawing, I'll create a new file in Photoshop and then add my drawing as the bottom layer. Then I get out some reference books to help me put flesh on the bones. One of the most thorough references is from Greg Paul's Field Guide to Dinosaurs. Got a lot of really detailed information about the dinosaurs as well as top views, side views, and he'll list out the specimens. It's a really, really great reference. So now that I've got my drawing in Photoshop, I can start figuring some things out. After looking at my book of references and kind of figuring out where some muscles are, I was able to get sort of a basic silhouette about what the dinosaur is going to look like. And once I know that, I can go in and start building, you know, the background, the deep farthest background of it. Maybe move up to another layer of trees and shrubbery and, you know, dead stuff. Got some more pieces of debris, some extra foliage, a little bit more leaf cover there, a little bit more there. We got some more up front foliage. Got to have some ferns in there. We know ferns were present for quite a long time in the fossil record. We start adding in our creatures. We got a tree up front here with a microraptor hanging out on there. Then we can bring in our Acrocanthosaurus, looking a little upset. Why is he upset? Because his eggs, her eggs, I guess that's a girl, are being prowled upon by this Troodon here. Or perhaps that's a Utah raptor. Let them debate that in the Paleoart forum. I don't know what else this needs. Does it need this layer called vomit made of Cubscouts? I don't think so. I think we'll leave that out. Also, like, there's a color balance layer here. I don't know if you notice, see how it goes a little duller. A lot of times at the end when I think I've just about got it, I'll do a color balance to kind of just bump up the colors in some areas, the saturation, and then just sort of unify all the different pieces that I'm bringing together. For drawing the tablet, I just use one of these little Wacom tablets. As you can see, I tied my pen to it because I kept losing it. But yeah, I like these little ones. They fit right in your lap. So then I can just sit here and look straight forward and, you know, draw my dinosaur. Alright, so here's a sketchbook and some Allosaurus. A couple of these guys. Those guys. But here's the Acrocanthosaurus from Dinosaur Discovery Museum. And then that ends up printed out on this canvas. Nice. And you can see a sort of mounted on a stretcher bars, staple that. And the printing on these is pretty good. It really captures a lot of just little detail. You know. Okay, we covered a little bit about drawing and we got into some digital painting. Now let's talk a little bit about 3D and sculpting. This here is an Allosaurus made out of paper mache. Paper mache, if you don't know, it's basically just newspaper, flour and water. And this one was built over a understructure of cardboard. The cardboard came from a TV set. It was a real heavy-duty cardboard, and I thought it would be good for you know, a bigger paper mache project like this. And who doesn't want a, you know, dinosaur skull of their own? You know, Nicolas Cage famously paid millions for his. I think he got it from Leonardo DiCaprio, and just caused this outroar. Whereas for significantly less, he could have contacted me and I would have made him a nice skull, no problems with anybody. But yeah, that's an issue. Private ownership of fossils keeps it out of public institutions' hands. And it also can wreck studies. Just ask Professor Thomas Carr about that. So for this one, the reason I picked an Allosaurus is the Allosaurus is a fairly common fossil. They found many copies of the Allosaurus, so we have a very good idea of what their entire skeleton looked like, and we have a ton of reference that's really good for it. And that's what I use to create this. I use a drawing that had been created of the Allosaurus skull, front, side, top, back, and a lot of information. And I scanned that into Adobe Illustrator and did a vector drawing of it from that. And the reason for doing a vector drawing is because then you can output that to a plotter. Plotter is basically, it's like a big printer. It's got a arm that goes back and forth, and then it feeds paper through it. And in this arm you can put either a knife or a pen. In this case I put a big pen in it. And got my Allosaurus vector drawing up to scale. Actually, this might be a little bigger than the average Allosaurus you see, but they probably got that big. So after I blew up my vector drawing and got my plotter paper of it, I took that and sort of lightly cut out along some of the lines. And then you take those lines, you lay it on your cardboard, and you transfer the lines onto the cardboard. So that's how I got this major profile here, and also the jaw. Then I would do like another wedge piece that would go up here. That would give us the width of it. Kind of see it here, there's like a bridge. Basically the roof of his mouth. So that, you know, it's a pretty simple shape. Once you break it down into its pieces, it's then when you get into layering on, like, you know, figuring out what the eye socket looks like. You know, you would have a little eyeball here, and just sort of building up like they have these ridges just in front of their eyeballs. But basically, once I have the cardboard cut out, then you can start laying in your paper and sort of kind of sculpting it. There's even like a paper mache pulp you can get. It's basically your newspaper and everything all ground up, so it's more like a clay. So once you're laying your strips of newspaper and your paper clay on here, you'll eventually get the structure. And once I had that, it was just a simple matter of choosing a color. A lot of the Allosauruses you'll see in museums are black. I'm not sure why. A lot of fossils you see are basically like this brown color. I know a lot of it has to do with the minerals that replace the bones during the fossilization process. Some of it is just, you know, the curatorial decision as they're presenting these. So I went with classic brown. Basically just gave it one big spray paint coat of brown. Then went back in with a few darker and lighter shades just to kind of bring out some, enhance some of these details that are on here. To do the teeth, these teeth are actually made out of sculpting foam. So I spent the day just sitting there with my sculpting foam, whittling out lots and lots of teeth. Because you want to have extra, because they're going to break. People are going to futz with this thing. And I like using it as a prop when I go and give a talk like this. So I made several of those. And they're held in with like a little bit of like a nail, sort of. There's an understructure in there. But yeah, eventually, with enough time and space, I can finish this guy, do his spinal column, all his vertebrae, hips, leg bones, beak. Be nice. I don't know where I would have the space to put it, but fun. Now here's another 3D medium you can use. This is actually made out of Sculpting. But you can see you can get sort of finer detail, a little bit more depth to the color, just a little bit more realism. Sculpting is nice because you can just bake it in your oven. It's fairly easy to work with. For something like this, when it gets a little bit more than a few inches big, you kind of need to build a wire understructure. And I would do that with, there's like a wire mesh you can use, and that'll help me flesh out just the basic understructure. But actually, similar to this bigger one, I would do the teeth separately and cook those as their own thing. Actually cook those first. Because then when you place them in with the rest of this and cook it again, the teeth will get a double cooking, and they'll be, you know, a little harder, probably more brittle actually, but you know, it's easier to get that shine on them. That's actually some glaze too. But yeah, that's another medium. This similar. This is, you know, this was a Ceratosaurus. This is also a Ceratosaurus. This one's a lot more simplified. Because it's made out of a sculpting foam, and that foam is a lot like there's an insulation foam you can get that's similar, or a florist foam for jamming flowers into it. But this is something I would use to create mascots. Actually, there's a big mold you make before you make a mascot to get those big funny looking plastic heads, and it's carved out of this stuff because it's porous. And you can pull air through it and then put it on a vacuum former, which isn't what I needed to do with this. This is just, you know, experiment to see, you know, how much detail you can get out of this really simple stuff. It's real lightweight, you know. And then you just basically put some house paint on it to prime it, and then you can go back in and paint it with your different colors. Okay, now this guy, Triceratops, or maybe this is a Torosaurus, not totally sure. But this is made out of that same sculpting foam. And this was something I made actually after Paleofest last year, talking to Tyler Keelar. I was asking him about, you know, how do they do those when you see the dinosaurs, the full restorations in a museum, how do they do that? And the way he was doing it was, it's similar to this foam. This foam you can actually, there are big CNC machines that will sculpt a lot of this foam for you. So if you have your dinosaur model made, you know, like in ZBrush or another 3D program, and you're having that output into this foam, you'll get like pretty close. And then what he told me is that you can put it's like a 2-part epoxy that you put on this, and it makes it really rigid, really durable, really hard. And it also makes it good for accepting paint. And this particular 2-part epoxy has a pretty long work time, I think like an hour or two. So while it was curing, I was able to take a press mold that I had made of scales and just sort of press that in there to get all these lumps and ridges and stuff. And it, you know, it goes pretty quick. You could go back in with some Dremels and stuff later and probably refine it more, but for this, you want the paint job to carry most of the work. I think I even put some, we got some, these are like bird eyes you can get from a taxidermy supplier. That's what I was looking for. From a taxidermy supplier. But yeah, makes it really rigid, really durable, and that's, you know, there's your museum display. Alright, that's going to conclude my little talk on Paleoart for now. Thank you guys for sticking around and listening to me jibber jabber for a long time. Wish I was there with you all. hopefully next year, Paleofest will be back in full force at the museum. And we can all hang out and talk about our favorite stuff, natural history, paleontology, in the Burpee Museum.